We're inshallah going to continue on with Mathara. This is the third meeting, so we should get to fear and desire of other than Allah. I don't know if I'll be able to do that, because we still haven't finished the others. But you should have the latest version or update of this. And we ended on hasad, right? So hasad is yeah. This is an updated version here. So the Arabic's not on that first part because you already have it on the other part. But you can just make the changes as necessary.
Can the people who are registered in the class take, because we made according to the people who are registered, if they are guests, then we'll make it some more copies for the guests and they can get it. And that's just people who are registered in the class take
Hasad is probably one of the most serious diseases. Again, because you have a difference of opinion about the diseases and the root disease, some say hasad is the root disease. But again, I think it will always go back to tama', because desire, in hasad there's always desire. So really it's going to go back to tama'. Or hubb riyasa, like Ibn Ashur says, but then even Ibn Ashur admits, that the source of all wrong is hubb al-ajila, which again, love of the world is related to desire. Hasad, according to the ulama, is the first disease. It is the first manifestation of wrong in the heavens. So, أول ما عصي به الله في السماء الحسد. The first thing that Allah was disobeyed with in the heaven was hasad. Because Iblis, nothing prevented him from bowing down except for hasad. And it's a hasad that's called ta'azzuz, which he'll go into. He couldn't stand that Adam a.s. would have a higher position than him. Right? He couldn't stand that. Or hasad al-takabbur, it's related to his own pride. Istakbara, he was arrogant and full of pride. So, now there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said that hasad will eat good deeds like the fire eats wood, which is really important because if you've ever seen fire eat dry wood, right, it should let you know what happens to the hasanat. And so they say the hasid, who is the person who actually has envy, and his object of envy is called mahsud, right? And we should know this, the hasid, in the verse of Quran that people should memorize, وَحَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدٍ, right? وَحَاسِدٍ إِذَا حَسَدٍ. Hasid is shaitan, is al-hasid. And so to have envy is to manifest one of the attributes of shaitan. And there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, Kullu dhi ni'matin mahsud. Every possessor of a blessing, any blessing, is envied. So there's always going to be somebody that envies you if you have a blessing. Two people, street sweepers. One of them has a cart that he has to pull, and he's got all his brooms and everything on it. The other street sweeper has a donkey that pulls his cart. For you, totally insignificant. For the one without the donkey, he looks at the one with the donkey, and he envies him. So it doesn't matter what level it's happening. Envy is a very strange thing, and it permeates human culture and society. And it's also believed that envy has a harm. There's a madarra related to envy. But it's said that the one envying, his envy harms him before it harms the object of his envy. So he's harmed by it faster than he can harm the object of his envy. Although the evil eye is generally related to envy, it doesn't have to be. Some people just have the eye. It's some type of psychic power that some people have. So it doesn't have to be that they envy, although it's dangerous. Like traditionally in a lot of Muslim cultures, a firstborn male, they used to pierce their ears and dress them as little girls for the first 5 years. I mean, really, they did that. It was very common. And I knew somebody, an older man, who had holes in his ears, and I asked him about it, and that's what happened. So people were very fearful of these things. Now, obviously, in Western culture, most of this stuff is seen now as kind of superstitious. It's interesting that every culture has a concept of the evil eye. Every culture. European cultures. I mean, invidious, which means to envy, means to look with evil. Right? The evil eye. It's an evil glance. Right? The Chinese have an evil, and they do a lot of ritual to prevent the evil eye from afflicting their houses. You'll see mirrors on Chinese houses often, and it's to deflect the evil eye. So it's a universal belief. It's not limited to Islam. People, and generally when you have universal beliefs, there's a foundation for it. It's not an imaginary type thing. Although the anthropologists would say, things happen to people, right? And they don't know why it happens, so the way that they explain it is things like he got afflicted with the eye. In other words, it becomes a kind of easy way of explaining the inexplicable. Right? So you do get situations where people will attribute something to the eye simply because they can't, like somebody gets sick, and you don't know why they're just sick, and you look and all these different, nobody can understand why. They'll say, oh, it might be the eye, musab bil-ayn. So, there's a hadith, al-aynu haqq, the evil eye is true. And the Prophet, if you look at him, he was somebody that was very much engaged in getting rid of superstition. Right? I mean, when the moon eclipsed, the Arabs believed that if a moon eclipsed, it meant a great person died. And it eclipsed the day that his son died, Ibrahim, the moon eclipsed. It was a perfect opportunity for somebody who was a charlatan to get a lot of... and people actually became Muslim that day because they said, the moon eclipsed for his son. He went out, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and announced to the people, the moon is a sign of Allah, the sun is a sign of Allah, and they don't eclipse for anyone. So he dispelled that superstition. So part of his teaching was really to dispel superstition. So when he said, al-aynu haqqun, and it's a sahih hadith, he's telling us that there's something real in the world called the evil eye, and people should take it seriously. It's not a joke. And in English you say, if looks could kill, right? People have a sense of when somebody's looking at them. And there's psychic power with looks, So anyway, the hadith says that hasad will eat يأكل الحسنات كما تأكل النار الحطب, just like fire eats dry wood. And the reason for that is because when you have hasad, and he explains it here, right? He said, وَارْسِمْ بِحُبِّكَ زَوَادَ النِّعْمَةِ عَنْ غَيْرِكَ الْحَسَدَ تَحْسِنْ رَسْمًا. Describe your desire for someone's loss of their blessing as envy, and you'll have correctly described it. So, if you desire somebody to lose a blessing that they have, that means that you're envious. It could be anything. It could be a house, a car, a job. Somebody got a promotion over you and you wish they lose their job. They do a bad job so they get fired and you get the position. Or just so they get fired. Somebody gets, has a husband that you envy and you don't think she deserves him and you wish she lost her husband. Or a wife, something like that. These type things. Envy is many, many variations of it. But ultimately, it's the idea of loss of ni'mah. And a ni'mah, which comes from an Arabic word, na'ima, which has to do with softness. It's the opposite of difficulty, right? Softness. So ni'mah are things that make life easier, is a ni'mah. Now obviously there could be a ni'mah hidden in a ni'mah, and a ni'mah hidden in a ni'mah. And they say it's a blessing in disguise, right? In this culture, in English we say it's a blessing in disguise. In other words, you don't see the blessing, but it's there. Every cloud has a silver lining. These type things indicate you have to be careful with what's a blessing and what's not a blessing. So a ni'mah is something that Allah gives, and Allah's name is Al-Mun'im. He's the giver of ni'mah. If Allah gives a person a blessing and you wish they lose that blessing, what you're basically saying is Allah was wrong to give that blessing to that person. In other words, you are judging Allah's wisdom in placing a blessing with somebody else. And one of my favorite stories is, and some people have heard this, but Al-Asma'i, radiyallahu anhu, he used to travel all these desert camps to collect words and things. And he was at one Bedouin's tent. And the Bedouin, the women come in, serve and sit. It's part of Bedouin culture then and now. And this man had a very beautiful wife, and he was incredibly ugly. And when the man went out to sacrifice the sheep for Al-Asma'i, he couldn't resist saying to this woman, how did you end up with this? How did such a beautiful woman like you end up with such an ugly man like that? And the woman said to Al-Asma'i, and Al-Asma'i, he's relating the story, so he's that type person. The woman said to him, "Ittaqillah, have taqwa of Allah, fear of Allah." She said, لَعَلَّهُ أَحْسَنَ إِلَى رَبِّي وَأَنَا جَزَاؤُهُ. Maybe he did good things with his Lord and I'm his reward. Or لَعَلِّي أَسَأْتُ إِلَى رَبِّي وَهُوَ عِقَابِي. Or maybe I did some bad things and he's my punishment. So the point being, Al-Asma'i was saying, Allah has a hikmah, and you don't know what the hikmah is, so you have to be very careful when you are looking, what's that doing there, or why is that person with that person, or, right? So, Allah is Al-Mun'im, He's the giver of blessing. And if you question the ni'mah, then you're questioning the giver of the ni'mah. And that's why Allah hates it. And that's why Shaitan was disobedient to Allah. And the difference between Shaitan and Adam alayhi salam is Adam, when he made his mistake, he made tawbah. And the hasud doesn't make tawbah. The hasud is unable, because part of his problem is kibr. Right? He doesn't feel somebody's worthy, and he's worthy. That's takabbur. I'm better than him. He doesn't deserve what he has. And that type person, they can't make tawbah. It's hard for them to admit they're wrong. So they don't turn away from their hasad. Right? They don't actually turn away from it. So then he says, بِحَيْثُ لَوْ أَمْكَنَتْكَ حِيلًا تُزِيلُهَا أَعْمَلْتَ تِلْكَ الْحِيلًا. So he says, he means by hasad that really, in other words, if you were able through some ruse to eliminate it yourself, you would do so. You'd utilize that thing to eliminate the hasad. What that means is that the Sharia definition of hasad is, because there's a hadith, لا يسلم المؤمن من ثلاث. The mu'min will never be safe from three things. And hasad is one of them. Dhann and tiyara are the other two, which he'll get to. Hasad is one of the things that no mu'min will ever be safe from. In other words, it's going to emerge in the heart. You're going to see something and you're going to wish you had it that somebody else has. Right? So the cure for it is لا تبغي. إذا حسدت فلا تبغي. The hadith says, if you have envy, don't harm. Don't oppress the person. And this is why, as long as you won't do something that causes that person to lose the blessing, then it doesn't go under the category of hasad that is harmful. In other words, that eats your hasanat up. The hasad that eats your hasanat up is the hasad that you would actually do something if you were able to cause them to lose that blessing. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And then he says, أَمَّا إِذَا كَانَتْ مَخَافَةُ صَمَدْ عَنْهَا تَصُدُّكَ فَلَسْتَ ذَا حَسَدْ. If your fear of Allah causes you not to want to do that thing, in other words, to harm the person, then that's not hasad that's going to harm you. But if you could, you would, that is dangerous. And then he said, فِيمَا تَرَجَّ حُجَّةِ الْإِسْلَامِ مِنْ فَضْلِ ذِي الْجَلَالِ وَالْإِكْرَامِ. In other words, that's what the Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu anhu said about hasad. So that's his judgment, how he distinguished it. That's where that's coming from. And then he says, قال إمام الغزالي ومن كرهه حتى كأن يمقت نفسه له برئ من أداء ما لزمه أما الدواء فعمر بضد مقتضى الهوى. He says, Imam al-Ghazali said, if you hate it so that you despise that part of yourself that's causing you to envy, then that means that you're not an envious person. So hating the experience in yourself of envy is a sign that you're not an envious person. And this again is recognizing that you have a nafs and you have a ruh, which are really the same thing. But the nafs is the ruh that still has the tarnish of this world. It's not pure. And so recognizing that in yourself, that things like these things that occur to the heart, those are part of the taint or the pollution. As a result, it's the ran that has acquired or accumulated over the heart as a result of wrong actions and these things being in the world. So if you detest it, then it's a sign, in fact, that the ruh is it's a higher force in you, this pure aspect of yourself. And then he said, as for the dawa, he said, the dawa is amalun bididdi, right? You have to, he always gives us usually, he gives us two treatments. One of them is the knowledge, because islah al-qalb, rectification of the heart, has to come by two things, al-ilm wal-amal. So now he just told you what the knowledge is. You have to know that the way to get rid of the hasad is not to want to harm the person and to have taqwa of Allah and to recognize what a bad thing it is. That's your knowledge base. But now he's going to give you the amal. Right? أما الدواء فعمل بضد مقتضى الهواء كنفعه إن زان ضرا والثناء عليه حيث لك ذما زينا. This is really important. The first is not to follow what your hawa desires. And hawa is caprice. Right? Al-hawa is caprice. Hawa it comes from a root word which means to fall, and it's also related to the word wind, hawa'un. Because the nature of hawa, of passion, is another translation. The nature of passion is that it's like a wind. It comes, stirs things up, and then it dies down. Right? When the wind comes, shakes the tree, does all of its damage, and then it dies down and goes away. And the hawa is like that. Sometimes it comes to the self and sometimes it leaves. And if you follow the hawa, then you're following whims, caprice. You're not following the aql, which is something that's thabit, it's fixed, it's not like the wind. Haqq is thabit. Batil is always something yazul. It's something that goes away. If you look in the history of man, you can see very clearly these false things come and then they go. They come and they go. They come and they go. Right? Whereas haqq is something, it's fixed in that everybody recognizes that it's true. It doesn't matter where. I mean, haqq in terms of its manifestation will manifest and remove, but it's always recognized for what it is, as haqq, by the people of haqq. Whereas batil is something, in one people it's one thing, in another people it's another thing. It just has no foundations. So he's saying, don't follow your hawa. And hawiya is the name of Jahannam. Because hawiya takes you down into the fire. Hawiya. And your hawa is what takes you down there. Right? Ummuhu hawiya. Right? The hawiya is the fire. Jahannam. وَمَا أَدْرَاكَ مَا هِيَ نَارٌ حَامِيَةٌ. So, when he says to do the opposite of what your hawa says, now he's going to give you an example. كَنَفْعِهِ إِنْ زَانَ ضُرًّا. Like benefiting him when it would seem to be a good thing to harm him. In other words, your hawa wants to cause harm to him. At that point, you do mujahada. And you actually benefit the person that you have envy towards. It's a really important thing here. So if you have feeling envy towards a person and you really want to harm them, you do the opposite. You give them a gift. Right? You give them a gift. And that's going against the nafs, getting a reward with Allah, but doing something else. Or another thing he says, and I'll get to what the other thing is doing. عَلَيْهِ حَيْثُ لَكَ ذَمًّا زَيَّنَا. Praise him when it would appear good to you to say something bad about him. So somebody who you have hasad for, somebody mentions them in a gathering, and you feel like saying, oh, you know what he did? Right? You want to say something, that you actually say something good about him. And there's always something you can say about somebody. You know, I mean, Hitler, you could say, you know, the guy really did what he set out to do. Whatever. You can always find something good to say about somebody, right? You can, and that's the thing. So you choose. You know. You choose. And the thing to do is, you know, if you want to say something bad about him, say something good about him. Or her. Now, what that will do, one of the things it will do, is if you do that to the person who you have hasad for, it will cause their heart to incline towards you. As their heart inclines towards you, now obviously this isn't always true. In other words, if they have hasad for you, which is very possible, and they're not working on themselves and they haven't studied matharat al-qulub, then you can get in trouble, right? Because there are some people, but generally good people, which those are the people that we want to not envy and beyond. Because he'll get to that it's permissible to envy bad people. Generally good people are inclined to love those who show good to them. So if you do good for those to that person, they will tend to want to do good to you. And if they do, it changes your heart. So what Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says is if you actually apply this, you will see a transformation in their heart and in your heart. Right? And then he says, and then another theoretically is to know وَعِلْمِ أَنَّهُ يَضُرُّ الْحَاسِدَ يَغْتَمُّ الْآنَ وَيُعَذَّبُ غَدًا. Not only you should know, this harms the hasid, the one envying is harmed by this. In this world, he's always anxious and upset. The fact that, why did he get that promotion? He shouldn't have got that promotion. He goes home and complains to his wife for 2 hours about so-and-so got the job that the promotion he should have got. In other words, he becomes obsessed with the object of his envy. And it's a disease in the heart that causes him to have gham. He actually has this feeling of sadness. And it's a result, it's meaningless. It has absolutely no meaning whatsoever. It's a completely insane act to envy another person. It's a completely insane act. And the Arabs have a really powerful proverb which Al-hasud la yasud. The one who envies can't get into a position of leadership. In other words, the fact that you have this resentment is actually prevents you from ever accomplishing anything in the world. People that, the envier, see, a person who doesn't have envy, if he sees somebody doing something, he'll set out, it might motivate him to go out and do it himself. But he's not going to sit there, and why is that happening to him? Why isn't this happening to him? He just goes out and does it for himself. So the one who envies will never have siyada. And one of the interesting things about the Muslim world now is that we're filled with envy. The Muslim, when they look at the Europeans and the Americans, even though a lot of them use all this Islamic rhetoric to talk about how horrible all these Europeans and kuffar and this and that, the real bottom line is they have dunya and we don't. Seriously, for a lot of these Muslims, they have dunya and we don't. And so there's hasad. Or, for instance, like the Arabians who got all the oil, you have all these people in other Arab countries or some other countries always talking about these terrible Gulf Arabs. How, they just waste all the Muslim money. It belongs to us. Well, what the question to ask is, if oil was discovered in Jordan, would all the Jordanians be awliya, giving out fi sabilillah all over the... No, it's a question for them to ask. In other words, you can look and say how terrible the Gulf Arabs are because they're wasting all the money of the Muslims. That's easy when you don't have any money. But what do you do when suddenly you've got all the dunya? Right? That's the question. So, and there's a strong case that they're probably giving a lot more money than most of the other people would be doing because they're extremely generous by their nature. It's part of the traditional desert Arab culture. And there are a lot of really generous people there. So the point is, you can look at them, but really, is your anger, is it from resentment and hasad, or is it really being stimulated by an altruistic desire for wealth to be used properly? That's a question. Now, you can look also at the communist revolution,